In our everyday activities session, we'll be covering mobility and risk of falls, washing and dressing, eating and drinking, continence, and night disturbance. So, why is it that people with dementia may experience physical difficulties? Well, we've talked about the brain and the brain being involved in all of what the body does. So possibly the dementia is causing direct damage to the parts of the brain involved, for instance, in being able to balance, being able to walk, judge distances, recognize physical sensations, differentiate night and day. But it may be more indirect, that is, the person's memory loss and difficulties in thinking, organising, planning make it harder for them to take care of their physical needs independently. And we'll show you what we mean by this in the next slide. So our ability to pay attention, to judge distances and make sense of what we see, to understand and use language, to remember and basically to think, to plan, to problem solve. All of these areas make up what we call our cognitive function. So let's have a look at how impairment in cognitive function could impact. Here's our first scenario. I'm feeling cold. Well, that requires some problem solving. Imagine moving from late summer to autumn, the temperatures begin to dip. You have to remember how the heating operates. You have to recall that you have some thermal underwear or you have a warmer duvet, and you have to remember where they are too, and you have to organise and plan in order to keep yourself at a comfortable temperature. And if you're regularly cold, that's going to stiffen you up, make you more vulnerable to falls, etc. What about this one? My foot is bleeding. A not uncommon scenario as people get older and the skin gets thinner and that kind of thing. So what would we do if we had a bleed on a lower limb? We would apply pressure, we would elevate the foot and stop the bleeding. But that does need to be remembered as a process. And again, it's not uncommon that people experience that difficulty but don't quite know what to do about it. And here's an example of something that requires quite considerable cognitive function. Take one tablet a day, one tablet 4 times a day, an hour before eating. So you've got to A, remember that you're supposed to be taking the tablets, but B, you've got to be able to organise yourself not only to space those tablets across a day, but also to fit them in 1 hour before eating meals. And if you can't do that, and more widely, if you can't remember and organise to take your medication, clearly that's going to have a big impact on your physical well-being. So this is what we mean by the more general cognitive skills can lead to physical problems because people become less able to care for themselves. So in this first part, we're focusing on walking about and on risk of falls. Mobility problems and the risk of falls may be a core symptom of some types of dementia, and in particular we're thinking of the Parkinsonian shuffle in Parkinson's dementia and Lewy body dementia. But what we call gait, the walking ability, can also be affected, for example, in a vascular dementia. For some people, it's not so much the walking that gives people a risk of falls, but it's more what we call their visual perceptual ability. So the ability of their eyes to make sense of what they're seeing, of their surroundings. And if that's impaired, it can increase the risk of tripping, bumping, and falling. For others, it's the memory problems that then cause the person to forget to use whatever mobility aid they have been prescribed, whether it's a walking stick or a frame. And again, forgetting to use those necessary aids can put them at greater risk of falling. And finally, on balance, people with dementia are in the older age group and are therefore more susceptible to infection and more likely to have things like arthritis and joint problems, potentially weakness and pain, and all of that too can increase the risk of falling. So these are just some basic tips to minimize risks of falling. We've also already talked about keeping warm because getting chilled can stiffen people up. Good lighting's really important. Often people have moved on to the low energy light bulbs, but they may be dimmer in terms of illuminating a room. Things like night lights and movement sensors can be really helpful to give people orientation at night time. This one, colours that define rather than merge, that's an interesting one. There is some evidence to suggest that in Alzheimer's disease, pastel colours tend to merge. And so you might, if you're noticing, for instance, that your relative is bumping into door frames, maybe to define the door frame with a bolder colour perhaps would be helpful. Sturdy furniture, that refers to having furniture with arms ideally to help people push themselves up from a chair, but also avoiding chairs with wheels and things. And the height of furniture is important too. And you can get advice on that from the occupational therapy department via social services. Ideally, aim to make changes before falls rather than in a response to a fall. So have a look at the flooring, the area, try and make sure there aren't any trip hazards, things like rugs and cables, and that applies both inside and out. And if you think that footwear or clothing could be a risk, so things like sloppy slippers that fall off the foot, or very long skirts that you can catch your foot on as going up the stairs, those sorts of things might be worth thinking about. These are some further general tips. That first one, are some household chores now too risky? It's things like climbing a step ladder to change a light bulb and that kind of thing. And on the one hand, you don't want to be discouraging people from doing things that they can do and want to continue doing and have always done, but making some sort of a sensible risk assessment about what is all right and what is not. Same with the consider storing frequently used items in areas that avoid stretching and stooping, such as the letterbox cage. I can recall having a talk from a physiotherapist who said that if we go overboard in preventing people from needing to do that regular stretching, stooping type exercise that's part of general daily life, then we might actually be inadvertently preventing them getting the daily exercise that would be good for maintaining their health. So it's a balance between what's necessary to keep a person safe and what's going overboard. If a person is living on their own, and particularly if you think they're at any risk of falling, wearing some sort of alarm, push button alarm, either round the neck or on the wrist, is a really good idea, and getting them to practice using it once a month so that they're more likely in the event of a fall to press the button. There are also falls alarms that operate without a person pressing a button, just registering a hard fall. So if you think that your relative wouldn't be able to push the button, that's something else to investigate. And obviously, if you are going to have people coming in the event of an emergency, the presence of a key safe and a code that you can pass on to the emergency services is important. you can contact the occupational therapist at this number at the Health Hub and ask for advice on safety equipment in the home. And there is further information both about the falls alarms and fitting key safes and a handyman service to help with that in our information pack at the end of this presentation. We've included this slide because obviously if a walking stick is issued by a physiotherapist or an occupational therapist, it will be the correct height and the person will have been given instructions as to how to use it. But many people buy their own walking stick or inherit one from a family member. So we've shown here when the arm is hanging at the side, the handle of the stick should be level with the wrist bone. If it's too high, it will force the shoulder to the wrong height. If it's too low, sometimes people walk without holding the stick without actually putting it on the ground, but even if they are putting it on the ground and stooping and then trip, they're less likely to be saved from falling than a stick that's the right height. This fourth point, that the stick is to be held on the opposite side to the injured or painful leg. This is not what many people do. They think it's the other way round. So that's worth focusing on. And the other important thing is that the rubber ferrule at the end of walking sticks do wear quite quickly and need replacing. So that's important to check, because if it's been polished smooth, it actually might it might cause a fall because the person is expecting to be able to rely on it and then the stick slips. It's important to let the person's GP know every time they fall, so that if falls are becoming a problem, there may be referral to certain services. One would be the Falls Assessment Clinic, where complete physical checks, blood pressure, that kind of thing, vision, hearing would take place, and a full medication review, checking for interactions between medications and any reason that there might be for falling. Another level of intervention might be the community falls prevention team, where the person will be visited at home by perhaps a district nurse or an occupational therapist to carry out full falls risk assessment within the home and put a plan in place, which might involve referral to services such as physiotherapy. It might involve measuring up and installing equipment, so grab rails, ramps, that sort of thing, seats in the shower. And another thing that can happen is there are local opportunities for things like seated exercise groups, because if people have fallen, they maybe have lost confidence, they maybe have lost some muscle mass, some strength, and perhaps need a bit of support in order to build back confidence in their ability to mobilize safely. Before we talk you through this slide, I just invite you to think about what you do when you get up from a chair, because your first thought might be, well, I just get up. But actually there is a sequence of movements that you make in order to get up from a chair. And this is what we're going to talk you through, because we're not suggesting that anybody tries to lift a person up from a chair if they can't get up under their own power. At that point, we would be looking at installing hoists and helping in that way. But sometimes a person with dementia might actually have the physical strength, but not the cognitive ability to process the step-by-step actions needed in getting up. So that's what might be what you need to prompt. So firstly, think about the chairs that people are sitting in. It's important, if they're beginning to have difficulty getting up from a chair, to think about whether the chair is sturdy enough for them to help themselves and also the right height. And a chair with arms is always good. So, first step, if the person is struggling to get up, make sure they've got their feet in the right place, about a hip width apart, and you can have one foot slightly in front of the other. Secondly, if they do use a mobility aid, don't put it so that they're going to put their arms out and grab and try and pull it, because that's obviously not going to be helpful, but put it just a little bit further away so that when they do stand up, it's available for them to take hold of. Now, when we sit up, we don't tend to sit up from the back of a chair. We do shuffle forward slightly, so you might need to prompt them to do that. Shuffle forward in the chair. Get them then to put their hands on the arm of the chair ready to push up. Now, what we tend to do then is we give ourselves a little bit of forward momentum. So we're going to be encouraging them to rock forwards as they push to get into a standing position. So you can assist with this by putting one arm in the small of their back. If you're standing alongside them at 90 degrees, put one arm in the small of their back, one arm on their shoulder, the shoulder that's closest to you, and involve them in that rocking movement, maybe to a count of ready as they rock forward, rock back again, steady as they rock forward, rock back again, and then a little bit of pressure in the small of their back as you say go as they stand up. Now the next couple of slides are about how to help someone up after a fall, but it's very important for us to stress that this is only if A, you're pretty convinced that they haven't hurt themselves, and B, that with a little bit of talking through, the person will be able to get up under their own steam rather than you having to pull them up in any way. So first point is don't get them up straight away, because when a person falls, they're likely to be shocked and flustered and all of that sort of thing. So firstly, and the instinct of people around is to go straight in there and try and get them up. Very often the person just needs a little while to calm down and get themselves together. So saying something along the lines of, look, don't get up straight away, just relax and get your breath, you're all right, make them comfortable. Obviously, point two, I've already said, but if there's any sign of serious injury, whether it be the legs at a funny angle or any bleeding or anything, phone the ambulance. Make them as comfortable as possible, keep them warm, phone the ambulance. Don't try to lift them. But if they aren't badly injured, they want to get up, they feel they could get up, this is a method that might be helpful. So find yourself 2 sturdy chairs and place one at the head end, one near the feet. Again, we're emphasizing it's important that the person does the work with the helper only guiding. So the first step is to get the person, if they're lying on their back, to roll onto their side. Now again, we're imagining a person having fallen with plenty of space all around them, and that often isn't the case. People sometimes fall just behind a door or down by the side of the bed, or this is best case scenario, you've got space to move. So the person's on their back, you want to help them to roll on their side. Now, I'm sure many of you have at some stage done some resuscitation work and looked at how to put people in recovery position, which really involves very little effort on your part in terms of rolling them over. So you can help the person to roll over in that way. So that's, imagine they're on the floor in front of you. You move the arm, you get them to move the arm that's towards you out of the way. You get their other arm and put their hand to the side of their face so that when they roll over, they're protecting their face. You get them to raise the leg that's away from you up into a point, and then you put gentle pressure on that leg, moving it towards you to roll them onto their side, and then you encourage them to get onto their hands and knees from that position. So the next stage, point 5, is to help them to kneel. Now, obviously, an elderly person with arthritic knees or whatever, this might be uncomfortable, so you might be wanting to think about putting a bit of padding under their knees. And this is where the chairs begin to come into place. So you put the chair that you've put in front, you bring that close to the person who's kneeling, ask them to put one hand and then the other onto the seat. This is point 7. And then bring one of their legs up with their foot on the floor. And then you get the second chair behind them so that they're feeling it on their bottom. And then you ask them to push with their arms and legs and sit back on the chair behind them, and you're guiding them as you do so. So remember, you're not lifting them, they're doing the work. You keep your back upright. And then the last point, let the doctor know that they've had a fall. It's also important to think about the senses, eyesight, hearing, in terms of mobility and balance. So as far as eyes are concerned, important that people continue to have regular eye checks. Possibly some visual problems might be related to the brain being able to make sense of what the eyes see, and we'll go on to talk about that in a few later slides. But it may also be that vision is changing and glasses need new prescriptions. The process of having an eye test may begin to become an issue for some people with dementia. Many opticians are skilled in assessing the vision of people with dementia, but there are times when actually a home eye test is more appropriate. And there are organisations like the Outside Clinic, but even opticians like Specsavers will offer both eye tests and hearing tests. This is another important point. Check your relative is wearing the right glasses. Again, a bit of a cognitive process, but we have come across people, for instance, trying to wear their distance glasses for reading and vice versa, and not working out what the problem is. And to check too that the glasses are clean. Again, we've come across situations where the person is wearing glasses but they're very smeared, and it's almost as if they haven't made the connection between, I can't see very well, I need to polish my glasses. Hearing and ears are important in balance. Ear infections and build-up of wax can upset balance, and it can be more difficult now. Obviously something to talk to the GP about, but I think GP practices are much less willing to get involved in ear syringing than they were in the past. And we've already mentioned the Outside Clinic will check hearing on request. So we mentioned in the previous slide that sometimes the brain doesn't make sense of what the eyes can see. So this is hopefully a way of illustrating this. If you scan from right to left on this image, I'm imagining that you will see some black dots. But there are actually no black dots on the image, they're being produced by the brain. Here's another fairly classic visually confusing image. Some people see the vase and only come to see the two profiles later. Others, it's the other way round. But once you see both, your brain tends to switch between the two, which is a strange sensation. And here's another deliberately visually confusing image where it becomes difficult to count the legs on the elephant. And this is an interesting one. Some people immediately see people, and for others they see animals, a dog, a cat, a rabbit. So have a good look and see if you can make both out. So the picture on the left has a woman on the top left of the image, and another person slightly lower down on the right, and a baby across the bottom. And then the picture on the right is, I think, 2 children, or maybe a mother and child, and then below, I think, possibly a couple. A fairly common visual misinterpretation is to see lines on flooring as different levels, so as steps. and that can cause a person to change their gait and to go as if to step down and therefore to stumble. Flights of stairs can be difficult perceptually, so this picture is inviting you to think, is the flight going up or coming down? There's a bit of a clue in the bottom left-hand corner with the pair of Wellington boots. Another thing to say about particularly coming downstairs, is it can be made more difficult if you're using bifocal or varifocal glasses, because you're looking through the wrong kind of lens for mobilizing. And shiny surfaces can be misinterpreted as being wet and therefore slippery, and sometimes you can pick up on people changing their gait when they step out onto a shiny surface. Choice of flooring, and including carpeting, is important in terms of considering vision and visual perception. If you look at this carpet, it almost seems to be moving because of the high pattern. And this carpet is not that dissimilar to the previous one, and actually one of our staff took this photograph. It had been installed in the staircase of a local care home. This rug has a dark central part, which could be interpreted as a hole, and obviously the lines around the sides could contribute to that and look like steps. Or are they flowers? Is the person going to stoop and try and pick them up from the floor? So what we're suggesting is, particularly if there's a comment that doesn't quite make sense, to think about the possibility that there may be an element of visual misperception that is underpinning it. So this one here, there's a mouse in the bin. You can see that the curved surface, the curved shiny surface of the bin, which has a reflection of the line of the tile and the doorstop, could potentially look like a mouse. And if you don't have the cognitive ability to see what the alternatives are and to think this through, then you could quite easily come to that conclusion. So the summary of the section on visual perception is that we're suggesting that you pay close attention to the person's reactions and responses to their surroundings, and to have an awareness that strong patterns, shiny surfaces, reflections, and poor lighting that casts shadows, all of these things are going to make visual mistakes more likely. And it may be that by making some slight changes either to lighting or to decor, you could minimize some of the confusion that's taking place. So now we'll take a break and see if there are any questions or discussion points arising from these slides.